For me, and I hope for the average person in Trinidad and Tobago who would have paid attention to what we addressed here today, this is a day that I would always want to remember, because it's quite different to other days where we address issues and we would leave here today hopefully having satisfied the interests of all. Ladies and gentlemen, the main purpose behind this conference today, this public education exercise, is to allow the people of Trinidad and Tobago to know of their circumstance, so as to be able to determine and to protect their interests. Because it would be quite easy for us to be guided by, impressed by, influenced by those whose interests might be to speak without information, to influence without exposed motive, or simply to look after your interests at the expense of my interests. In recent years, as leader of the opposition, and more so as Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, I have had the opportunity to interact very directly with the people who are, to put it simply, the movers and shakers in this hydrocarbon industry, an industry which we depend on for our livelihood in Trinidad and Tobago. And in these interactions, these conversations, I try to impress upon the investor class, the investor grouping, or corporate partners, that we are not fighting each other. We're in this together. The only difference is that the investor group has no difficulty in identifying its shareholders. And I, representing the people of Trinidad and Tobago, must also identify and work for my shareholders, who are the people of Trinidad and Tobago. And to do so, there are times when we'll disagree. There are times when we'll be excited about prospects. And there are times when we may have to be disagreeable, hopefully not too frequently. Ladies and gentlemen, the hydrocarbon industry in Trinidad and Tobago is an industry of which this country can and must always be proud, because we have been pioneers in this industry. But over time, someone like me, having just been described as being in Parliament for over 30 years, would have had a perspective which might not be shared by many of the young people. But it's valuable. Because if you've been around as long as I've been, that perspective could take you from birth to the grave. In other words, you might have seen it all. And it's against that background that as Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, I have this sense of urgency that we need to do something about this thing. Today, we talked a lot about LNG and about gas. But I was there when Prime Minister Patrick Manning spoke about an LNG business in Trinidad and Tobago. And he was, in some quarters, virtually laughed at. Because some of the experts then believed that it could not be done. It has not only been done, but it's been done successfully to the point now where we are having probably 70% of our gas going into LNG. That's a great accomplishment. Yes, it is. But then when we're being told that even as that is the case with respect to consumption of this wasting resource, that we have managed to put ourselves in a situation where the returns to the people of Trinidad and Tobago are not what they should be, then we have a problem. It's against that background I bought a book to read. I want to quote 2 or 3 lines from a particular book so that you'll see what I spend my nights doing and why I'm impressed by this. This book is a book called 7 Elements That Have Changed the World. And it's written by a gentleman who is very well known to us here in Trinidad and Tobago. A gentleman called Sir John Brown. He used to be head of BP. And Sir John talks about the 7 things that changed the world, and one of those things is natural gas. We used to be a country that used to flare natural gas, but then we started to compress it and use it as a raw material and started with one fertilizer plant. So when Sir John wrote about the 7 things that changed the world, and God knows our world has been changed by natural gas, he said this. He said in May 2004, he was flying around in Trinidad in a helicopter with Prime Minister Patrick Manning. And to quote, "Trinidad contained some of the jewels that BP has recently acquired in its merger with Amoco. And I was there to ensure BP's growth in the region would continue. BP had made several major gas discoveries in the late 1990s and early 2000s, including the first one in Trinidad's deep water." And then he goes on to say, "Manning wanted to ensure that this latest find of natural wealth would be used for his people's benefit." Ladies and gentlemen, if nobody understood that, Sir John Brown understood that. And that is why, when we see the data today that Trinidad and Tobago is not benefiting as we should from our natural gas resources in the way that it was envisaged that we would in hard times and in good times, then certainly the people of this country should shut up and take notice. And then he goes on to say, with respect to the policy of what should happen with this raw material, he says the government wanted to use gas on the island rather than export it. And energy-intensive industries became attracted to the area. And that locates the downstream. And of course, today we talked about the huge capital expense that is required to tap into the resource that Tony Paul showed us in the charter in his diagram, the resource there, dating back to the Pliocene, the Miocene, even to the Cretaceous. But we're trying to make it now marketable for our current consumption. And Sir John Brown says, building a pipeline is very costly. Billions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars. To be financed and to get a return on the investment, a pipeline needs a guaranteed long-term contract between the producer and buyer of the gas. But then he goes on a little further. He says, each party must trust that the other will hold to their part of the deal. And finally he says, even then he was writing in 2013, this book is written in 2013. He says, compared with oil, gas has lost 80% of its value in the last decade. The way the market received gas when we came into the LNG business, if you had put a value on the resource base then, that same resource base today is worth only 20%, because the market has changed so considerably that gas price in the market that drove the industry is now way down low. So the value of the resource, this wasting resource, has collapsed. And finally, he says, former Prime Minister Patrick Manning was right. Make sure you use your gas to add as much value in your own country before you export any of it. I suspect that thought will go through the heads of many policymakers. Ladies and gentlemen, I made those quotations so that you could put them in perspective against all that you've heard today and try and figure out what policy prescriptions Trinidad and Tobago should pursue. You would have heard today about how much gas is consumed where, about contracts coming to an end, about who gets what from the industry. And you would also hear in the days ahead about what we should and shouldn't do. The one thing that the government knows that we must do is to sit down and talk with the companies that are involved about getting a fairer share, because we have incentivized ourselves into leakages and losses. You know, the word incentive has been overused in Trinidad and Tobago. Every time something is not going right, someone will tell you it's because of an absence of incentives. Well, we have given so many incentives that at the end of the day we are so attractive that the incentives in some instances meant that we've given away the shop. And of course, it can be presented to us in very logical and impressive arguments that had we not given those incentives, and if we don't maintain these incentives, they'll walk away from us and not invest in our country and we'll all starve. Well, when we reach the point where we bring up gas, produce it, sell it in a market where profits are being made, and the return is negative, meaning you get nothing, meaning that you'll have to pay the person to take it from you, something is radically wrong. And we just can't accept that as the way of doing business. Or are we surprised? I'm talking here about the billion-dollar part of the Ministry of Energy. It's a billion-dollar business. You know the $10 part. The Ministry of Energy was meant to manage this affair, funded by the industry itself. But a simple thing like licensing and managing gas stations in Trinidad saw the Ministry of Energy falling down on the job. How many of you recall the El Pecos explosion that killed somebody? And then the next thing, a few days or weeks later, a similar explosion took place in another place. It turned out to be the same truck, probably with the same man doing the same thing. And then we discovered that the Ministry of Energy had not even been issuing licenses to gas stations, a requirement under law for gas stations. Those two explosions could have made world news had they gone the way they could have gone. But fortunately they didn't. I tell you this to say, if that is how we manage the gas station business in Trinidad and Tobago, what confidence do you have that we have managed the LNG business any better? And are we relying on luck and good graces? Or are we to say that the time has come for us to talk and to work more professionally and more effectively, because this is serious business? Tony Paul talks about secrecy and conducting public policy in secret. Because I've been around a long time, I remember when having access to the 2D seismic data sheets were almost impossible for us researchers, because they were in the ministry. And because they were in the ministry, and because they belong to the government, and because they belong to the energy sector, it couldn't be made available to researchers. I approached Minister Herbie Atwell, who at the time was energy minister, expecting to be told no. But surprisingly, he said yes, you can have access to look at that data. At that time, I was at the Seismic Research Unit, cooperating with the Northwestern University, a friend of mine, Professor Bob Speed. And we looked at 2D data. I'm not even sure if the geophysicists in here know what 2D data look like. But I tell you what, spend many hours, nights and days looking at 2D data and trying to figure out what is real and what is reflection. And off the east coast of Trinidad, what is the diapir of mud and what may be gas or oil? But it was very exciting then, 2D data. And then the technology brought us to 3D data. And now we under OBS work. And a couple of years ago, I went to Germany and looked at BHP's data, and I was blown away as what they're looking at now, and how easy it is to look underground now. But in terms of risk, and in terms of saying whether NGC should remain in the business having not taken the kinds of risks that upstreamers take, my perspective is, yes, our geology is complicated. Yes, our fields are mature. Yes, our basin is still a good geological province. And the technology allows that risk to probably be even less than when you're looking at 2D data. Because the 2D data had initially said to us that there was no gas or oil off the East Coast. There were failures until Amoco struck it good. And the risk then allowed for exploration investment, for tax write-offs, and for earnings along the way. So why is it necessary, with today's super technology, to think that the risk is so great that you have to incentivize in a way that you have to be allowed to write off your investment in the way it's being written off now, so that there's this huge negative on the revenue stream? Because of course, if there are no profits being declared, there's no petroleum profit tax to be had. And if you incentivize yourself to a point of having no profit declared, then you are incentivizing yourself to receiving no tax. And of course, if I'm talking about tax, I'm really insulted when I'm being told by those who put themselves in the know in my country, they're telling me that we should not be disincentivizing the investor, the foreign investor, by a tax of some kind, because they would not invest in our country. What we should be doing is being more appreciative of the multiplier effect of what little money they're spending in this country, and the dollar goes down the way, all the way down to the vendor in the street corner. So somebody's shareholder is good enough to receive the earnings as cash, as dividends. But we, the owners, should be very happy to behave well and think deeply about the multiplier effect of what little comes in our way. I'm saying that that is not how it should be. How it should be is what Sir John Brown identified in his book, and what Patrick Manning envisioned when he fought this fight and won to create the LNG industry, which is now known as the Trinidad and Tobago model. When we started out in LNG, we were getting our earnings in a destination marketing arrangement, which means that you go to good markets, we get a good return. You go to bad markets, we get a bad return. The market is up, we get a good return. And 2008 was the best earning year for Trinidad and Tobago in our history. Unfortunately, the world economy went into a tailspin the following year, and we've never revisited 2008 again. And our circumstances have gone the way you saw it today, from 20 billion down to 1 billion. Needless to say that those who make demands on the government don't want to hear that at all. From 20 billion to 1 billion, but just still give me more. But the bottom line is this, that as we go into these change markets, and the change in our time, and maybe I shouldn't say our time, my time, I'm the old man. I saw LNG being created in Trinidad and Tobago. I saw it going to the northeast of the United States, where there's a winter every year, and they need it. And I thought, like many others, that this is going to go on for a very long time, if not forever. And LNG grew in its flow into the United States. What we're being told now is that the entry points into which we put that LNG into the United States are now export points coming to supply Jamaica. We in Trinidad and Tobago didn't even make sure that if the Jamaicans were going to go to LNG, that they go to Trinidad and Tobago's LNG. But in good times, people don't think very straight. Sometimes it's in the hard times that you think at your straightest. We've had some very good times in Trinidad and Tobago in the hydrocarbon sector. This time is a different time, because markets have changed, prices have changed, productions have changed, and in many instances for us, not changed for the better. And I wouldn't be surprised if tomorrow, one of the well-known influencers of local conversation accuse us, me in particular, or the government, of not diversifying the economy and spending too much time on the hydrocarbon or the oil or the gas sector. And what is required is to diversify the economy. And my answer to that would be, yes, we can diversify as much as we like, but we have to hold this anchor in the hydrocarbon sector, because we know of no feasible diversification that can see us abandoning where we at in hydrocarbon and getting the possibility of any significant percentage of the earning possibilities as exists in the hydrocarbon sector. High risk, high investment, but also high returns. Those are the hallmarks of this sector. And of course, we can do all these things together. It's not one or the other. Diversification means doing all of them at the same time. So we focus on getting the best arrangement for marketing, the best arrangement for investing, the best arrangement for exploration, and more importantly, that whatever it is, that our role through the Ministry of Energy must be instantly modernized. As a matter of fact, one of the reasons why Mr. Lashley presented here this morning as your permanent secretary and not former permanent secretary is because he has been held on in the job. And I think Friday is the last day. And I want you to give Mr. Lashley a round of applause. He officially retired a year and a half ago, but we just couldn't let him go at this particular time because we needed his expertise. And he agreed to stay on, to work with us on these assignments, and also to assist us in the succession planning, in getting someone to replace him, because you can't just put anybody in the Ministry of Energy as permanent secretary and say, be the permanent secretary. It has to be a permanent secretary who knows something about the business, because that ministry is managing a business, and it is the failure to manage the business of Trinidad and Tobago that caused us today to be able to show you some of those graphs in the way they were shown. Because those graphs you saw today are of historical experiences. And what we're trying to do is to create a different graph as we go forward. And the Ministry of Energy is a specialist agency in the management of that objective. I also want to acknowledge, and I hope I can recognize him, former Minister Wendell Motley, if he's here. Former Minister Wendell Motley. In the long time that I've been around, I've spent 2 sessions with him. One was when he floated the currency. Brave man that he is. And we were told that all hell will break loose. And the ad that was attacking that was a saucepan with some water drying up, and that was our future and our portion. Today we know that that was an inspired intervention. And when we embarked as a government on dealing with this issue that brought us here today, I didn't have to twist his arm too far, but I had to twist his arm a little bit, because he was in retirement. And up until today, he has postponed that retirement to work with us. Because this business of oil and gas is, for those who are involved, it might be simple and straightforward. But for those who are not involved, it's a complicated business. And for those of us geologists who run a country, Frankie Khan, Patrick Manning, myself, Eric Williams, we are the only country run by geologists. But I tell you one thing, I'm a special kind of geologist. I'm a volcanologist. I deal with volcanoes. And there's a, I could have been another profession though, but the one that I'm in, there's a poll that's taken in the United States every year. And a certain category of people win it every year as being the most untrustworthy. They shall remain nameless. And volcanologists come in second, almost every year. Only astronauts beat us. But you can be a good lawyer, don't worry. And I was saying, former Minister Wendell Motley did yeoman service in holding a team together, pulling together some of the best talents that we have in the country, to look at this issue, to see what was happening, to see where we at, and to see how we should respond so as to give the people of Trinidad and Tobago the best chance to have these resources, this business, these endeavors contribute to us. And it would be a hell of a thing indeed if this nation of Trinidad and Tobago, 1.3 million people, total population about the size of one mid-sized American city, with resources of that nature in this business, that we end up in an IMF program for $200 million US, while we're leaking $1 billion out of our tax net. It would be a hell of a thing indeed. Ladies and gentlemen, I have given this country the assurance that under my stewardship, Trinidad and Tobago will not go to the IMF at this time. And certainly, not for a pittance, while we're allowing our resources to go through our fingers because we were sleeping at the wheel. built the energy business by building relationships, starting with WG Grace. We bought interests when others thought the end had come. We might have had more faith in our destiny than others that we should. It's our destiny. But I think we have a reputation for being responsible and also for being fair. And today, I'm confident that all our partners in the corporate sector, be it BP, Shell, EOG, BHP, locals, I'm confident that as we look at this issue, we would all see room for improvement. And we will all see imperatives for change. Today, I can report that the disturbance between NGC and CNC with respect to the ending of a contract, which resulted in the stoppage of the flow of gas to a plant as the principals negotiated a new contract, that business exercise has virtually come to an end, and NGC and CNC have agreed to a new arrangement. The gas will flow again, and the partners will profit going forward. But sometimes it might take a little more than hello, how are you, to get recognized that you're present. We as a people, we in the government, acknowledge that these are difficult times and these negotiations are very serious and maybe even difficult. But that's why they're called negotiations. Some element of give and take would be involved. And in this, we are not without some of our own strengths as we project from time to time that we are exposed to weaknesses. One of the most important assignments of this government is to ensure that the relationships that we've built with the producers, upstream, midstream, downstream, remain productive relationships. And I dare say that those relationships are strengthened because strong companies as your partners, sharing fairly and evenly, good for all of us. It's a win-win situation. We also want to ensure that the business of government in Trinidad and Tobago is not a secret, because we have nothing to hide. And that is why today we had no difficulty in showing you the same data that we show members of the cabinet. We have nothing to hide and everything to protect. With respect to our young people, because of the casual way that we've gone about our future, we have very many bright young people who, you were told today, are either unemployed, brightest and the best, been to some of the best universities. We hail them when they win the scholarships and go abroad to some of the best universities. And then we're not interested in what happens after. Well, that will have to change. And some fundamental changes will have to be made so as to absorb that kind of talent if this country is going to have a future. And it's against that background that I've engaged the assistance pro bono of former Permanent Secretary Jackie Wilson to go out there and find our national scholars in certain particular fields, because we are reconstructing the Ministry of Energy and other areas where their skills are required, to give us a chance to be the best that we can be. So that when we sit down across the table from those who look after their shareholders, those who speak for Trinidad and Tobago, will have the wherewithal to be respected across the table and to come away with a fair deal for the people of Trinidad and Tobago. This is a country of bacchanal. This is a country of minority. This is a country of majoring in minorities. Worrying about the sweat on your brow while your blood is leaking out of your veins and arteries. We need to get serious. And I hope today that all our partners will take away from today's exercise that Trinidad and Tobago has a bright future in the hydrocarbon business. My fellow geologist, Tony Paul, we go back a long time, said, and I endorse what Tony has said, that it's our view from our professional standpoint that the hydrocarbon basin across the mouth of the Orinoco geologically still remains a very attractive basin for exploration. That's our view. It's also our view that Trinidad and Tobago has a bright future in hitching its wagon to the hydrocarbon industry as a contributor to the exchequer. Our revenues tied in there. So our view that there's a role for the government in ensuring that the people of Trinidad and Tobago, while being participants in this very lucrative business, get more than crumbs that fall off the table. And that is why we will countenance no advice that the NGC has no place in this business, because the NGC is not an investor. The NGC is a pipeline company, and this is the vehicle by which the people of Trinidad and Tobago get a reasonable return for their involvement in the hydrocarbon business. And finally, as we put our acreage out and we are successful, or the major investors are successful, we get our return in taxes or in cargo, in one form of cash or kind. We ought not to shy away from the business of the marketplace. We got ourselves into this situation because we shied away from knowledge of the marketplace. That is coming to an end. It's against that understanding that we have worked for the last year and a half with Porton and Partners, and that we are ensuring that we get the best advice available, so that when we come to the table to talk in a zone of mutual respect, that Trinidad and Tobago is not disadvantaged. We welcome investors into our country. We're one of the few places in the world where the hydrocarbon business is done close to tropical beaches like Maracas, with a carnival and beautiful women. That's our country. So much as we have other kinds of problems, many other people are looking for oil and gas and clouds of mosquitoes and sub-zero temperatures. Trinidad and Tobago is still a beautiful place to live in and to work. And if you don't believe me, ask the foreigners who live here. So ladies and gentlemen, we are satisfied with the response that we have been getting so far from those in this industry, because so far the indications are that there's a willingness not to treat contracts as cast in stone. That while contracts bind us to terms and conditions, if the conditions have changed so dramatically and so detrimentally, then the reopening and renegotiation of contracts is a reasonable demand of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. And we anticipate that our partners in this business will see our claim as a fair and just one. And we anticipate that there will be some reopening of contracts so that at the end of the day, we can all sustainably benefit from the God-given riches of Trinidad and Tobago.